Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a good week. I'm sorry for the late reply. I've been traveling down to Texas this week and I finally arrived and I meant to post last night, but I just kind of crashed after I got here and fell asleep for the night, so apologies. Um, in terms of the reading, though, I think one of my biggest takeaways from this reading, specifically like chapter 9, with like setting those like group dynamics and stuff, is that everything that we are talking about is very like leadership oriented, and without like a set leader in my eyes, like these things don't happen. And it kind of makes me relate back to some of our first readings where um and when I think about like norms and stuff for the group and how those come about, I think with what we're getting from this reading is if we want this stuff to happen, we want our groups to become more personal, communicate effectively. We have to, as leaders, then like set up norms for our group so that they like kind of abide by them almost. And then that way, if like those things like talking through conflict in a specific way, or um, predicating that like this group can be personal so like we can work better together, or blah blah blah, setting that as a norm will then or kind of creating culture that turns that into a norm is helpful, because then it'll be like the basic level of like this is just how we normally function. um, so I thought that was pretty cool. um, and then the other point that I kind of felt that like it was really resting on with all this information was that the basis of like building community is like very important to like good group work. Sorry, I'm a little uh um so and I think from what I gathered, at least from building that community for an effective group, is having personal connections within the group, and like those interpersonal connections help the group to be stronger. um, I think what I really liked was just like taking time like at the end of meetings to like give people like a little bit of socialization, and then like asking personal questions so you get acquainted with the group rather than just being like the cogs in the machine, as the reading was saying. And then the other thing was that like having those personal goals, like individual goals, and then also like community goals, so that like people can see that their personal goals do align with the group, and that we care about each other's personal goals, but that we also have community goals, so that we can stay focused and centered and have like something to rally behind. um, the other aspect of the reading I really liked was from 10, like conflict. Um, and I think my favorite takeaway from that was that like conflict is good for the group. I mean, without conflict, we don't, it, there's not really problems to solve. And I think at the basis of a problem solving group, you kind of need a problem to solve, and conflict is allows us to not only solve like the problem that like we have the group for, but if there's no argument, are we really solving that problem? Um, and then from the, I didn't really work this week because I was traveling, so I wanted to share something from this previous summer at the camp in Utah I worked at, because I think it pertains very well to the chapter 10 reading on resolving conflict. And something I noticed where uh, in chapter 10 it lists out the three different types of like conflict and like how to solve for them. The tool we use to solve conflict or issues, whether it was interpersonal or work related, or like that kind of thing, was we use this method called CFR, which stands for concern, feeling, request. And I feel like this is a good method, or like basic method for solving all types of conflict. So starting with like concern, basically to your group you state your concern. Feeling, you state why you feel that way. And then request is the most important part, I feel like, because it, rather than with just the concealing concern and the feeling, you're basically just presenting a problem to the group and saying, hey, solve this problem for me. But when you present a request, it shows that you've thought about this and that you understand like that it is a problem, and you're kind of giving the group to go off something of how to be able to solve it, rather than just being like, oh, like blah blah blah. And this also worked really well with interpersonal conflicts. So like, for like over this last summer, me and my I was our program director and I was working with our assistant director, and we were like really good, great friends the previous summer, and then this year we were kind of hitting a rough patch just because of all the work we were doing, and we had like new positions, so we really hadn't functioned as friends being on leadership together. So I was like, hey, my concern was that like, we seem to be like drifting apart as friends, and I feel that this is because, we're stressing each other out with the work stuff, and we haven't figured out like a good way to work together yet. My request is that we sit down and we kind of like talk about how we can work well together and still be friends and blah blah blah. And it was able to open like good dialogue on how to be able to resolve our conflict and stuff like that. But one problem I did have with the chapter 10 or the chapter 10 reading was the interventions for dysfunctional behavior. I feel like a lot, especially for like the distractor one, like for the dysfunctional behavior that is like distracting, I feel like the methods for fixing that behavior is very much in a way that calls people out rather than calls them into the group. So I think a good example for that would be like for the agreeer, the person that's always agreeing, just blatantly saying, hey, you're kind of too agreeable. How is this different? I feel like that's very much like calls them out and makes them feel bad for their actions, and I don't think we want to make these people feel bad for their actions because it isolates them. We want to bring them back into the group, so I think we need to find a better way to be able to call people in rather than call them out so that they feel comfortable in the group. So basically a way to point out the behavior without making them feel negative for said behavior. But yeah, so if you guys have any ideas on how to do that, I guess that's kind of like my overarching question for this reading. But yeah, I hope you all have a week.